It started on a quiet night in the suburbs, the kind where silence feels heavier than peace. A black man walked slowly toward his home, his shoulders carrying nothing but the weight of a long day. But behind him, headlights cut through the darkness. A car crept closer, its tinted windows hiding the eyes fixed on him. When the engine stopped, two figures stepped out. Men in tactical vests, their presence too deliberate, too practiced. They weren't neighbors, they weren't police, yet every move screamed authority. He paused at his gate, unaware that this wasn't a routine patrol. This was a setup, and these men had chosen the wrong target. The men moved with confidence, their boots crunching the gravel like they owned the street. Their vests read community enforcement, but something about the patches felt off. Too clean, too new, like costumes from a store. The black man, standing firm at his gate, raised an eyebrow but said nothing. He didn't argue, didn't shout, didn't even flinch. The neighbors, though, noticed. Curtains shifted, porch lights clicked on, whispers rippled through the street. One of the impostors barked orders, waving handcuffs in the air. "Step aside. You're under arrest for violating HOA regulations." His voice was loud enough for everyone within earshot to hear. An arrest for HOA violations? The idea was absurd, but absurdity has power when wrapped in authority. The crowd began to believe. Was this man really in trouble? Had he broken some hidden law? The impostors smirked, feeding off the tension. They didn't know the man in front of them wasn't just another homeowner. They didn't know his silence was measured, his calm deliberate. Because behind those watchful eyes, he wasn't intimidated. He was calculating. And when the truth came out, this staged arrest wouldn't just collapse. It would expose the entire scheme. What they thought was intimidation was actually their first mistake. The fake officers tightened their circle, their boots planted firmly on the manicured lawn. One pulled out a clipboard thick with papers, waving it like an arrest warrant. "This is official," he shouted, his voice sharp. "You violated HOA property codes, and now you're coming with us." The neighbors gasped. To them, the paperwork looked legitimate, the uniforms convincing. A few even took out their phones, recording every second of what looked like a lawful takedown. The man at the center, calm, unshaken, finally spoke, his voice low but clear. "That paper you're holding," he paused just long enough for the crowd to lean in, "isn't worth the ink it's printed on." The imposter sneered. "Careful. Talking back will only make it worse." But what the crowd didn't know was that the man's words weren't bluffs. Every detail, the stitching on the vests, the mismatched badges, the absence of body cams, he had already noted. His mind worked like a scanner, cataloging evidence faster than the imposters could blink. Because this wasn't his first confrontation with fraud. He had spent years hunting criminals who wore disguises far more convincing than this. The crowd shifted uneasily. Some began to whisper, "Why was this man so calm? Why wasn't he resisting?" And then, one of the imposters made a mistake. He pulled out a pair of cuffs and reached for the man's wrist. The crowd gasped again. But before metal could touch skin, the man stepped forward, slow, deliberate. His eyes locked on the fake officer with a force that made him hesitate mid-motion. The imposters thought they were in charge. But in that single step, the balance of power shifted. Because the man they were trying to arrest was the one person they never wanted to provoke. The cuffs hovered inches from his wrist. The fake officer smirked, ready to hear the satisfying click of metal. But then, the man raised his hand, not in surrender, but in command. His voice, calm yet razor-sharp, cut through the air. "You boys picked the wrong house." For a split second, silence blanketed the neighborhood. Then, with a smooth motion, the man reached into his jacket and revealed a badge. Not the cheap tin they wore, but the unmistakable gold and blue of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Phones zoomed in. Even the imposters froze, their smirks evaporating into pale disbelief. "Let me make this very clear," the man said, stepping closer, his presence towering over their false bravado. "I'm not just a homeowner. I'm a federal agent. And right now, you're impersonating law enforcement. An offense that carries more years in prison than you can count. The impostors stuttered. Their fake authority crumbled like sand slipping through fingers. One tried to laugh it off. This is just a misunderstanding. But the agent's eyes didn't blink. He pulled out his phone, tapped a single button, and within seconds, the faint sound of sirens began to echo down the street. Real units, real backup. The crowd's whispers turned to cheers. Neighbors who once doubted him now filmed with wide-eyed excitement. He's FBI. They tried to arrest the wrong guy. The imposters looked at each other, panic spreading across their faces. They weren't enforcers anymore. They were prey caught in their own trap. The agent leaned in, his voice dropping to a whisper only they could hear. Did you really think an HOA could scare me? Did you think your fake badges would fool a man who trains agents to spot deception? The imposter's hand shook. The cuffs he once brandished with arrogance now dangled uselessly at his side. As the flashing lights of real police cars filled the street, the truth was undeniable. They hadn't cornered a helpless neighbor. They had walked straight into the most dangerous mistake of their lives. Red and blue lights splashed across the quiet street as real officers poured out of their vehicles. Their uniforms crisp, their presence unmistakable. The neighbors stepped back, some whispering, others still recording as history unfolded on their block. The imposters tried to stammer excuses, but the moment the real police saw the FBI badge, the game was over. The man didn't need to argue. His quiet authority spoke louder than their desperate words ever could. Impersonating an officer, one of the real cops muttered as they snapped handcuffs, real handcuffs, onto the fake enforcers. You boys are done. The neighbors shook their heads in disbelief. Just hours earlier, many thought this black man was the one in trouble. Now they watched as the entire scheme unraveled. The HOA, once so smug and untouchable, stood exposed for what it truly was. A nest of corruption willing to stage an arrest to scare him off his own land. The FBI agent didn't gloat. He didn't need to. Instead, he turned to the crowd, his voice steady. This, he said, motioning to the arrested men, is what happens when power is abused. And this, he tapped his badge, is what happens when you stand your ground. The crowd was silent for a moment. Then a ripple of applause broke out. Some cheered, others nodded with respect. They had just witnessed the truth. Calm, courage, and justice could dismantle even the boldest lie. As the patrol cars pulled away, carrying the imposters toward the fate they had earned, the agent walked back through his gate. His home stood tall behind him, untouched, unclaimed by anyone but him. For the HOA, it was the end of their intimidation. For the neighbors, it was a story they'd tell for years. And for the man at the center of it all, it was just another night proving why he was the most feared FBI agent they'd never see coming.